Welcome to Education Forum. I'm Herman Badillo, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the City University. The improvement of education affects all New Yorkers. This program will focus on the key educational issues and challenges before us all. My guest today is Sal Stern, who is a contributing editor to the City Journal, the publication of the Manhattan Institute. Mr. Stern is also a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Sal Stern is from New York City. He graduated from Stuyvesant High School and City College, got a master's degree in political science at the University of Iowa, and he is primarily a journalist, although he has worked for the public advocate in New York City and had other governmental positions. But basically, in the last few years, his thrust has been writing about the need to reform the educational system. And that's why I wanted to have you here today, because you wrote an article that is called School Choice, the Last Civil Rights Battle. And what interests me in that article, among other things, is that you say that New York once enjoyed what many deemed a model urban educational system which worked very well to assimilate the children of the poor and the new immigrants into the mainstream society in those days. And of course, I hear that all the time. What changed? Why is it that previous immigrants were able to move so successfully into the middle class, and we're having so much difficulty with the more recent immigrants?
Well, actually, the recent immigrants from Asia and Eastern Europe are doing pretty well. I'm
talking about recent immigrants to New York City, not immigrants in the traditional sense of the word. I mean,
right.
Obviously, people
clearly
like Puerto Ricans who are American citizens, and other Latin Americans, and blacks who come in from the South.
Right.
In other words, it seems to me that now that we have a population in the school system that is over 80% African American and Hispanic, we don't have what is supposed to have been the success of the earlier immigrants.
Yeah, I think there are a number of reasons. One is, first of all, we believed in those days in the idea of assimilation and integration, and in the idea of one common civic culture that all kids, all new immigrants, the poor as well as the middle class, would aspire to. Secondly, I think in those days we believed in the idea of basic skills in the schools. I blame part of the problem on some of the doctrines of progressive education that dominate the schools today. The idea that children can learn on their own comes from our education schools, that the role of the teacher is just sort of as a facilitator. While this doctrine may or may not work, and sometimes it does work, particularly in the early grades, for the children of the middle class who go home to families in which literacy is an important part of the upbringing, where there are books, where there's discussion of current events, where there are newspapers, it doesn't seem to work very well for the children of the poor, particularly children where often there's only one parent in home. And I think by playing down the importance of skills, of math and reading skills and language skills in the early grades, we're creating an additional handicap for the poor and the minorities.
Well, you've studied the whole history of this movement. At what point did social promotion come into being, which I think is exactly the point at which we gave up on skills? Because when you went to school and when I went to school, we had standards. Did your work, you passed. If you didn't, you flunked, and it's expected you would. But
the old
changed.
Herman, the old system was also a sorting out system in a way, and we didn't think it was a tragedy in those days. We don't want to sort of idolize those days. There were problems then too. But one of the crucial factors was that we had a manufacturing economy, and so if a child dropped out in the 6th grade, or if it didn't, or not in the 6th grade, but after, somewhere in high school, it wasn't a tragedy. They could go and get jobs in the manufacturing trades. They could get a job on the docks. There are many jobs out there for people who didn't necessarily have a high school degree. Often they would come back and get a degree later in night school. Now, in a way, we're blessed by the fact that we live in a very high-tech economy, and the importance of these skills and of getting a high school education is much greater.
Okay,
and so we need to educate everyone.
Yeah, but you would think because of that there would be greater emphasis in the importance of education and ensuring that more of the young people graduate from high school. Instead, we find that maybe 50% of the kids drop out in the 9th and 10th grades.
That's right.
So why the reversal of importance?
Well, I think there was always a high dropout rate, but the significance wasn't as great because of now we absolutely can't afford to have kids not finishing high school because there aren't the unskilled jobs for them out there that there were 50 and 60 years ago. So the needs of the system are greater. I mean, and unfortunately, as you yourself have pointed out many times, we are not creating the standards. We're not holding all our kids up to high standards. We've tended to sort of push them along. We have a system that sort of functions as if the end in itself was the preservation of the system. As long as we get them through through high school, whether the degree means anything or not, even those who do graduate, the system has sort of thrown up its hands, and the results are kids coming into college, particularly in the CUNY system, until the reforms that you were so instrumental in bringing about, without an ability to read and to do mathematics at a college level.
But why are we giving up on the public school system? For example, one of your articles was headed "School Choice: The Last Civil Rights Battle," which is an interesting point, that the alternative to public schools is a civil rights issue.
Right.
But before we get into what you wrote there, why have so many distinguished people like you apparently given up on the public school system?
Well, I haven't given up on the public school system, but I do believe now is the time to create some competition for the public school system. We need to use we need a new paradigm in education. We can't just assume that that we're going to have a public school system that's going to educate everyone, and only the rich are going to be allowed to use, or the well-off are going to be allowed to use this alternative private school system. I think we have to provide more opportunities, similar kinds of opportunities for the poor to have choice the way middle class and upper class families do. Now, my kids go to the public school system, but I've been able to access choice within that public school system. Even so, there are a lot of problems with the schools that my kids have gone to, many problems, and they could be much, much better. But kids stuck up in the South Bronx or in Bedford-Stuyvesant or in East Harlem and who are in effect sentenced to failing schools, I believe they need, first of all, it's a moral issue. They need the same kinds of choices that my kids have had and that middle-class families have, who can move out of the city, who can sometimes afford to pay private school tuition. They need that kind of choice.
Well, now.
And the other point is that I believe that part of the problem, part of the reason that the system, this public school system, isn't rising to the challenge, this new challenge of educating everyone, is that it's stuck as this is a monstrous, huge bureaucracy in which the people who work for the system, and in many cases, teachers in unions and administrators in unions, have tremendous power to determine the policies of the system and use that power to preserve their own interest and forget about the interests of the customers, the families, and the kids who have to benefit from the education. So I believe that creating alternatives, creating competition, will have an effect in shaking up the system and forcing it to perform.
Well, before we get to that, do you think the new reforms that are being predicted for the public school system will help? For example, this year we will begin to implement the elimination of social promotion, and the Regents has said that they will insist from now on that no student graduate from high school unless they can have a Regents diploma. Don't you think that that will help?
I think it's one step in the right direction. I also think we need to end social promotion for kids. We also need to end social promotion for teachers. We have a social promotion system for the teachers in this system. No matter how poorly they perform, they get promoted. Once they have tenure, they get promoted up the salary rank. And nothing they do can stop them from moving up, getting higher salaries based on seniority. I think that's the other part of the equation. We want accountability for the results of the kids. I want more accountability for the teachers.
And what do you think is the realistic possibility that that can be achieved?
Well, the mayor has said that he's going to insist for the first time in the contract negotiations this year on some real performance standards. He's indicated, he said in his State of the City speech, as you know, we should pay the excellent teachers, give them higher raises, and the good teachers somewhat smaller, and the poorly performing teachers should not qualify for increased salary benefits unless they can perform. We also have to do a better job of weeding out completely the teachers who are not performing.
But on the other hand, Randy Weingarten says we don't even have enough teachers as it is. We need 40,000 teachers just to meet the current need.
Well, I question those numbers. I think that's part of she's doing what a good union leader should always do. You mount a propaganda campaign early in the process before you start the negotiations around the table, and you sort of say the sky is falling. Unless you pay all the teachers much higher salaries, 25% more, similar to the suburbs, we're going to lose our teachers to the suburbs. I've actually not found a single official or a single document anywhere where it documents the number of teachers we're supposedly losing to the suburbs. I think it's far less than anyone imagines. And even if it's true that we're losing some teachers to the suburbs, the question is, in a normal business, if you're losing some of your personnel to another agency or another business that pays higher wages, is the answer to give everybody an across-the-board increase, the non-productive as well as the productive? I don't think so. I think the answer is that, for example, in the areas in which we have shortages, math and science teachers, where there are, I agree, tremendous shortages, you want to pay more. You want to pay people coming out of liberal arts colleges with math and science degrees a bonus for coming in and teaching for 5 years or 7 years. Pay them higher salaries. You'll attract them.
Okay, well, let's continue after these announcements.
Now batting, Brett Butler.
Butler? He's a dinosaur. They should rename this place Jurassic Park in his honor.
Dinosaur, huh? Did you know that Shunosaurus and Ankylosaurus dinosaurs were capable of delivering crushing blows with their bony tail clubs?
If education is important to you, talk to your child's school about raising academic standards. Call 1-800-38-BE-SMART for a free booklet, and be a big league parent.
Even my third grader knows that.
Smart kid.
Welcome back. My guest today is Sal Stern, contributing editor to the City Journal, the official publication of the Manhattan Institute. Now, you've written, school choice is the last civil rights battle. Why do you consider it to be a civil right?
Well, it's a civil right because in the kind of society we have today, the idea of equal opportunity is meaningless unless there's also real equal opportunity to a decent education. And historically, it's one of the ironies. It's a point that Martin Luther King III has made, and Andrew Young at gatherings that I've seen them speak at in favor of school choice. By the way, two prominent leaders of the
do civil rights leaders in New York City consider school choice?
Some do, and some don't. It's beginning to be a battleground within the minority community. For example, the Reverend Floyd Flake is a strong supporter of school choice.
And what is school choice? What is meant by
school choice is the idea that kids stuck in failing schools, failing public schools, have a right to get out of those failing public schools and have access to the private and parochial school sector, and the right to find a school that works for them.
Okay, now suppose that a parent watching this program has a child in the South Bronx in one of those schools that has been historically a failing school, and so designated by the Board of Regents, and where no improvement has taken place. What choice, realistically, does that parent have?
Well, if we had a school choice experiment or a model school choice program the way they do in Milwaukee and Cleveland, that parent could apply for, would have a decent chance to get a voucher for perhaps $2,000 or $2,500 or $3,000 or whatever the amount that's set. Take that voucher to a local Catholic school in the very same neighborhood, enroll her child in that Catholic school, and wind up getting, I believe, and I think the data shows it, a better education for her child. There's some data that indicates that the child is likely to do somewhat better in standardized test scores. But more important than that, what the Catholic schools do is they keep their kids. They keep them out of trouble. They graduate from high school, they go on to lead productive lives.
Okay, but is the voucher program, has that found to be constitutionally acceptable? Because the problem there is the question of separation of church and state.
Well, we have to distinguish between vouchers for non-religious schools and vouchers for religious schools. There are a number of, in Milwaukee, the experiment started 10 years ago, and it was restricted to only non-religious schools.
But it could be done for non-religious schools.
Yeah, and it was done. It was an experiment, and there were several thousand kids who took the vouchers and went to non-religious schools. And I believe, again, the data that the research shows that they were doing better. The parents were happier. They were in safer surroundings, and it put pressure, it was beginning to put pressure on the Milwaukee public school system to improve. A few years ago, the state legislature extended that to religious schools. That was tested in the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled not only on the basis of Wisconsin's Constitution, but on the U.S. Constitution, that that was not a violation of the so-called doctrine of separation of church and state. When that decision by the Wisconsin Supreme Court was appealed by the teachers' unions and the ACLU to the U.S. Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court decided not to accept certiorari, not to accept the case, which meant that the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruling that it was constitutional stood. And as of right now, thousands of kids in Milwaukee are taking government vouchers and are going to parochial schools. In Cleveland, a federal judge ruled the program unconstitutional. So eventually this is going to be resolved. I think there's a big case coming at the U.S. Supreme Court. And there are indications by, legal scholars will tell you there are a lot of indications that the court is really ready to bend on this. And the court, the court follows the election returns in many cases, as someone said, and they see the pressure building up, particularly within the minority community, for an escape route, a kind of a freedom trail, if you want, out of failing schools into schools that might work for their kids. And the court, I think, will find some way to, at least the present court, if Al Gore is elected and he has a couple of appointments, it could change the balance. We're not, it's not clear. But I think there's a good chance that the Supreme Court will approve some of these programs.
The other choice that has been mentioned is charter schools. Right. What do you think? And that doesn't have any constitutional problem.
No, but these are public schools. Yeah. And I think charter schools are great. I think we need a mixture. We need a lot of choices. We need a lot of different kinds of schools because there's no one single formula. There's no panacea in any of these programs. What is clear is that we must challenge the existing bureaucratic structure of the public school system. We cannot have public education as a monopoly system which is controlled by its own bureaucratic interests and isn't challenged to improve by some form of competition. The competition can come from charter schools, which are public schools, but that are only answerable to state authorities for their results and can organize themselves and avoid the bureaucratic rules and regulations, in some cases the work rules. I think we need vouchers as well, and we need more choice within the public schools, and I believe we also need a contract for the employees who work in the system that rates them and rewards them on their performance and punishes them when they are incompetent and weeds them out.
Well, why can't the boards of education or the school's chancellors recognize the unhappiness that the poor parents feel at the non-performance in the schools. What, for example, would be required? What did Crew not do, and what could Chancellor Levy do, for example?
Well, Crew basically, I mean, I asked him that very question at a forum a couple of weeks after he, or a couple of months after he arrived in New York. And I said, what is wrong with allowing some kids to leave your system, and if they can find schools with public money that works for them, why is that such a bad idea? And he said, he just dismissed it out of hand. He said, I'm here to defend the system, not to support any other alternatives. I'm here to defend that. Well, unfortunately, that's what happens when you have a kind of an enclosed bureaucratic system where everyone who works within that system sees themselves as part and parcel of it, and there's a commitment to continue the system, and there's an unwillingness to change. But gradually, we are beginning to see some people willing to, accept the idea that it's worthwhile experimenting. It's not as if the system is doing so well that we can't stand and experiment. Now, hopefully, the new chancellor will, the temporary chancellor, whoever comes in, will see that what we do need, and particularly this chancellor comes from the business community, will see that we need to apply some of the practices, some of the common sense things that any enterprise does if it wants to survive in this world, in a competitive world, and some of those ideas, and apply it to the enterprise of public education, because that's what it is. It's an enterprise.
Is there any city in the country that has followed what you've suggested?
Well, Milwaukee has...
I mean, in changing not just the school choice of vouchers and charter schools, but revising the basic structure in the educational system.
Well, there are, in Chicago, as you know, the state legislature gave all of the power of the system to the mayor. The mayor appointed a tough CEO named Paul Vallis, and he's had some success. And they eliminated the Board of Education. I think that's another thing. We have to eliminate the current structure of the Board of Education, where 5, 6 different politicians, each of them elected by a different constituency, appoints members to the Board of Ed, none of whom really are education experts. I think this is asking for trouble, and we see the trouble that's gone on, these political fights within the Board of Ed. We need people who are accountable to the mayor, and the mayor is then accountable to the electorate for the performance of the
But in
public
Chicago,
schools.
have they had any luck with
the
teachers?
He's had some luck. It's very tough. It's very tough. The teachers' unions are extremely powerful. They are powerful because they are one of the strongest political lobbies in this country. There are several million teachers. There are 2 huge national teachers' unions. They are particularly strong within the Democratic Party. There were more teacher representatives at the last Democratic convention than all the delegates from California, which will give you an idea of how strong they are, particularly within the Democratic Party.
And they have a lot of money. In fact, now, they have ads on the TV stations.
Sure.
I guess they were motivated by the mayor's State of the City speech,
right,
in which he said he wanted to change teachers' tenure.
The teachers' union, the teachers' lobby in Albany is the most powerful lobby in Albany. They have tremendous power in determining and in writing the education law for the state of New York. And I don't begrudge them their right to lobby for what they see as their interests. But the people who ultimately have responsibility for the education system have to start thinking about the kids first and not the employees.
Well, and how long do you think that will take before change comes about?
Well, I'm rather discouraged by the fact that the mayor is now a lame duck, so he won't be around, and I don't have great hope for any of the prospective mayoral candidates, people like Mark Green and Alan Hevesy and Peter Vallone. I think they are, they're clearly beholden to the unions, and they're not going to shake the boat. And I praise the mayor for shaking the trees and trying to bring about some change in the system, which is an encrusted system that needs to be shaken up.
Okay, we'll have to wait and see what happens after this year's elections the following year. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
You can reach us by email at our website, www.cunytv.cuny.edu, or write to us at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. We look forward to hearing from you.